Housing markets are regional. What happens in one suburb directly affects what happens in a city, what happens in 3 suburbs away. When someone's looking for a home in Salt Lake City, they are not just saying, I have a specific jurisdiction that I'm thinking about. They think about homes near good schools, homes near skiing, homes near hiking. They look at that entire array of potential options, and that crosses and spans several jurisdictions at a time. And so the decisions of every individual jurisdiction directly play onto the effect of everyone else. So this idea that just, someone's just doing what's best for their community, everyone is implicated in the decisions of every single community and what they choose to do with their zone capacity and what they choose to do with their housing supply and the types of housing they allow to exist. So this is a situation where there is a lot of, there's no way for one county, one municipality to solve this on their own. It's very difficult. If one community decided to build tons and tons of housing, that's not going to change fundamentally the game if other communities don't also step up. And so that is one of the fundamental problems here. Voters have competing preferences. Sometimes they're very confused preferences, and it's very difficult to discern what to do here. But I think that often the lesson being taken at the very local level, especially by people who face the electoral pressures in local government, is that people just don't want development. They just don't want it near them, and it's not going to work. But I think instead what we're seeing is that people are not aware often of the connection between the decisions they make on project by project, opposition or support, and the larger housing affordability crisis. They're not aware that when they say they want to preserve their minimum lot sizes or anything else, that they're adding $30,000 to their future homes that they're going to be purchasing. They're not aware of these kinds of trade-offs that are being made, and it's the responsibility of government and government officials, of course, to make them aware of this, but it's also the responsibility to make tough choices. I know this is a state that cares a lot about making tough choices when it comes to fiscal responsibility, and there are tough choices and tough votes happening on votes and different fiscal measures, and this is another place where tough choices have to be made, that people are going to have a lot of opposition, and we've seen this across the country, but over time they see that these changes do not destroy their communities. There was a 5-year fight in Minneapolis and including 3 years of community input and outreach and changing the plans and suggestions for what they were going to do in the comprehensive plan. And people were really scared and upset, and there was a big opposition to passing the comprehensive plan that would upzone and allow triplexes across all single-family home neighborhoods. Now, I just visited Minneapolis. Almost nobody there cares. Why? Because it doesn't destroy communities to have 50 triplexes built over 3 years. There is a false understanding that when you allow these things to happen, that every single home in a community is going to be destroyed. But we all know in this room that land use planning is the planning of 50 years from now, 100 years from now. Everyone in this room is probably living in a home that's provided by the private market. 90% of Americans live in homes that are private market homes. The naturally occurring affordable housing, those were, at one point, expensive new homes. And if you don't build those, and we haven't for the last 50 years, you have to catch up now, or else it's us in this room, it's our children, it's our grandchildren. Those are the people who are not going to be able to have what was once promised to us when we were growing up.
Unfortunately, in some circles, zoning reform, I think, has become a bit of a contentious and scary term. Often characterized by one of the two following things. To some, it sounds like state preemption. That could come in many forms, like standards to policies that are carrots or sticks, with the goal of setting zoning and housing-related expectations among local communities and municipalities. I would admit that it is true that these are forms of zoning reform, but definitely not the only kind. So that's sort of one way to think about this that's, I think, pretty commonly understood, though may not be complete or totally accurate. And on the other hand, especially in academic circles, some have called for abolishing single-family zoning. That's kind of how zoning reform is thought of. Single-family zoning has had a lot of problems. Let's just get rid of it. These calls often critique, some of the things I've already said, like disproportionate amount of land zoned in US municipalities as R1. Now, you've probably seen the maps that show 65% to somewhere even upward of 90% land in many large American cities are exclusively single-family zoned. And that essentially limits what you can do and where you can do it. And those areas are not often the areas that have accessibility, have infrastructure capacity, have opportunities for future residents. So there is a clear mismatch that supports this idea of abolishing single-family zoning. I would say that in addition to these two things, there's a lot that's, I think, falls under the umbrella of zoning reform. Of course, in addition to abolishing single-family zoning, one could also reduce it. Targeted areas where these are pursued through upzoning, through specific alterations and such. Another one that you all, I believe, talked about last year is the missing middle housing. I think it's part of the zoning reforms toolbox, allowing duplexes, triplexes, and more by right, especially in areas with abundant infrastructure, can be significantly beneficial to producing housing and to addressing the need, especially areas that have accessibility. Indeed, locally, a 2021 study by the Gardner Institute that I found showed that apartments built between 2010 and 2018 have not reduced single-family home values within half-mile of those apartments in suburban Salt Lake County locations. I think that's encouraging when it comes to promoting missing middle housing in this community. And of course, there's ADUs. This is a part of this. Utah, I think, is a leader in this space. Another area which I think would fall under the context of zoning reform and is a massive, massive opportunity right now, given sort of the post-pandemic industrial sort of culture, is zoning for adaptive reuse. We know that there's a lot of vacant commercial space, thanks to remote work again, and other economic and cultural shifts. And not all of these spaces, I would admit, are easily or even cheaply convertible. But allowing such conversion by right or by limited oversight could open up a lot of significant synergies in areas, especially that have existing infrastructure. And lastly, of course, there is the piece around state preemption. State preemption, again, I don't think is a tool per se, but it is, I think of it as a regulatory scale at which any or all of the above tools may be adopted, suggested, regulated, pursued.
The NAR survey starts very interestingly. It starts off by saying, well, okay, right now, today, what kind of a home would you prefer to live in? About 70% of the respondents say they want to live in a single-family detached home. Big surprise. And then what they do is they say, well, I tell you what if you had an opportunity to live in a townhouse in a walkable community, or the single-family detached home way out in Tehekangone, and you have to drive everywhere? A walkable community versus a drive-only community, what would be your choice? It turns out that roughly half of American households would choose that townhouse, the walkable choice. And these trends, you can see that in the purple blocked areas, these trends are increasing, whereas in 2015, about 49% of Americans would prefer a small lot home that's more walkable. And that's increased now to 56% for the small lot home in a walkable community and 53% for a townhouse in a walkable community. And that trend line is increasing, you can see that. But we need to move away from the same old large lot zoning. We all know that. Doing it is difficult, but we all know we have to move away from that. We need to move away from the same old development regulations that are vague and allow for unreasonable conditions. Any of us in this business know that vague standards lead to egregious behaviors, especially when NIMBYs are involved. We need to change the same old impact fees. Now, Utah is one of the nation's leaders in impact fees, but too many communities in Utah, and across the country actually, too many communities charge the same impact fee on all residential development. We need to revisit the same old zoning that oversupplies commercial land but undersupplies apartments. Now, California has done something very interesting. They've said that non-residential property, industrial, commercial, retail, can have by right residential developments on those. We might consider the same thing here. That's a preemption, but that might be something we need to think about, at least locally, if not maybe through the legislature. And I've seen this in action, by the way. Oftentimes, a community will overzone land for industrial and commercial and so forth, and saying it's all economic development. Well, it's not. It's exclusionary zoning by keeping out apartments that could have been in those locations along corridors with transit or transit-ready corridors. And we all know what that amounts to. We need to do away with the same old zoning that is not in accordance with the comprehensive plan. A lot of states, and until recently, Montana being one of them, sort of overlooked the fact that zoning doesn't have to be consistent with the plan. So the plan says this area will have high-density housing, but the zoning says low-density housing. And then we need to get rid of the same old zoning codes that do not anticipate the future of the communities. Zoning codes are really backward-looking, not forward-looking. But one occasion I saw a zoning code was so backward-looking it was actually ahead of itself. Many years ago, a zoning code from Alabama came across my desk, and the city said, would you please update our zoning code to make it current with where the field is? Their zoning code was dated like 1948. It allowed for duplexes and threeplexes and fourplexes on single-family lots. It didn't have any parking requirements. It had narrow streets. It was so backward, it was forward.
This is a challenge that is bigger than any one of us, which is why these types of events are important. Addressing housing attainability, affordability, impacts so many different sectors, and I'll tell you, we at Salt Lake County are committed to figuring this out. When there's such a broad market force in an issue like this one, it's a little more challenging. Government interventions can be tricky. We don't live in a state nor a nation where you really want to get into a lot of tools that take away people's choice, right? And pass on the burden to someone else. So we have to be wise in the investments that are made, and we have to figure out how to bring our business partners, our developers and builders to the table through that process. Together, we can transform this challenge. When I believe, I hear the governor saying, you know, housing affordability is #1 on his list. It is mine here at Salt Lake County, and the great work of this team and you all in working together to change trajectory, improve things, so that my kids, hopefully their kids, your kids and grandkids, and our broader community really has a chance to succeed through home ownership.